Welcome to the first session of a new journey of digging deeper into our journey of faith as we celebrate our common commitment to follow Jesus. Um, Now, this new journey is really new. I haven't taken it before, and I assume that's true for you. And so we sort of take a new journey together. But this journey will be an attempt to liberate Jesus. Um, Now, um, this liberation of Jesus, whose life and teachings was committed to liberate his followers, of course, raises the question, Blake, what in the world do you mean when you refer to liberating Jesus? Well, my response begins with a quick look at history. The first followers of Jesus were composed of two groups. First were the members of the Hebrew faith community, the Jewish family, Jews who were attracted to and chose to follow Jesus. And they believed Jesus was the Messiah, the long anticipated revelation of the nature of their God. But the second group were persons known as Gentiles. They knew nothing or very little about the Hebrew faith community, and they had no knowledge of the anticipated Messiah, but they still followed Jesus. Now, in the Christian library, the Gospel according to Matthew was written to make the case to the Hebrew community that Jesus was the Messiah. It's a very persuasive, wonderful witness anchored in the 10 Beatitudes, the fulfillment of the 10 Commandments. We've studied that beautiful narrative together. In the Christian library, there's also other accounts of the gospel, and one was according to Luke. And it was written to make the case to the non-Jewish community, liberating Jesus from being the long anticipated Messiah, presenting Jesus as a rabbi whose life and teachings were the revelation of the God of agape love, empathetic and sacrificial love, living for others, not for oneself. Now, this is what we're going to dig deeper into during the next few weeks, is the Gospel according to Luke, a look at Jesus with no strings attached. No strings, not even the Hebrew faith. Now, we must be clear. The Gentiles who chose to follow Jesus before the Hebrew Bible was even composed. The Gentiles who chose to follow Jesus made the choice without any sense of Jesus being defined or imprisoned by an existing faith community. They made the choice to follow Jesus on the basis of who he was, what he taught, how he lived, and how he died. Period. Now, I'm convinced that the gospel according to Luke is relevant for 2024 and 2025, for it frees us to follow Jesus with no strings attached. Now, the point of beginning in our journey raises the question concerning the Hebrew Bible being included in the Christian library. it's crucial for us to be reminded that the Christian library is not a part of the Hebrew library. Let me say it again. The Hebrew Bible is a part of the Christian library, but the Christian library is not a part of the Hebrew library. Now, that fact, in my opinion, clarifies for me why we've got to dig deeper into the Gospel according to Luke. Of course, Jesus' own personal journey of faith was relevant as he grew up as a part of the Hebrew family of faith. This is the reason why the early church included the Hebrew library into the Christian library, because that was the faith that Jesus came from. However, that understanding has been replaced with the understanding that the witness of the Hebrew Bible is a witness of truth and therefore equal in importance to the revelation of divine love in the life and teachings of Jesus. You see, equal status from the perspective of following Jesus, equal status has been given to the witness of the Old Testament, equal to the witness of the New Testament. And you see, this equal status of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and the Christian library, the New Testament, has the consequence of imprisoning Jesus in the law, blinding many of the followers of Jesus to the gift of amazing grace. This is true in Christian education throughout the centuries. When the Old Testament stories of faith included the belief in a God of judgment and a God of a nation, a God of war, all that was presented to children, probably to you and to me. It certainly was in my being brought up in the church. Those Old Testament stories had equal status with the New Testament. And in so doing, Jesus was defined by the Old Testament, confined by the Old Testament, imprisoned by the Old Testament. That when you said yes to following Jesus, you said yes to the equal status of the Hebrew Bible. Now, the Gospel according to Luke presents a liberated Jesus, not bound by or imprisoned by the Hebrew faith. And I've decided that the best way to sort of get a hold of this is to look at the stories of Jesus that are in Luke, but are not in any of the gospel accounts that we have in the New Testament. Let me say it again. What I've decided to do is to look at the stories of Jesus in Luke that cannot be found in the Gospel according to Matthew or the Gospel according to Mark. And by lifting these out, I think we get at the understanding that Luke was trying to present to those early Gentiles. This is the Jesus that you are invited to follow. Now, I want to be clear. This is not to be over against the Hebrew Bible. That's certainly not over against the Gospel according to Matthew that relies on the Hebrew Bible. We respect the adherents of the Jewish faith. It's a wonderful faith. But Jews are not Christian. They don't pretend to be. And we are not Jews and should not pretend to be. There's a difference. And any attempt to combine the two as one is to be met with skepticism, because indeed they are not one, they are two. One is subsequent to another. Indeed, they are different. And it's important to look at what attracted those persons 200 years ago who had no history with the Jewish faith to say yes, to follow Jesus. You see, it's important to accept who we are. We're not adherents to the Jewish faith. We're not called to follow Jesus as the Messiah. If you choose to do that, that's fine, but that's not essential. We are akin to the Gentiles of old, indeed, who chose to follow Jesus, the untethered rabbi with no strings attached. According to Luke, defined solely by the revelation of divine agape love in the life and teachings of Jesus. Those parts of Luke that are not found anywhere else, indeed, is the hymn that we oftentimes sing. Tell me the stories of Jesus. I love to hear things I would ask him to tell me if he were here. Scenes by the wayside, tales of the sea, stories of Jesus. Tell them to me. And next week, we will begin by considering the first parable in the Gospel according to Luke. Jesus, no strings attached. There's a lot of new stuff there, but just for your thought and conversation, what is your response to the understanding that Jesus can be experienced and followed without being defined by the understandings of God presented in the Hebrew Bible? What is your response to the understanding that the Old Testament can be studied through the lens of the New Testament rather than the New Testament being studied through the lens of the Old Testament? And what is your response to the understanding that the two testaments have equal status, resulting in the imprisonment of Jesus? Welcome to the journey.